Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to look at the income and wealth gap. So again, number one here, we're going to present. That's the key operative term, present a trend, event, or phenomenon. In this case, this is a trend. The income gap is increasing and the wealth gap is increasing. So you're looking at a trend. Again, a trend is a decrease or increase or decrease over time. You can quantify. Okay? Again, like everything else, we're looking at the United States. All righty? So here again, you need two key statistics. You need, of course, one statistic that identifies, hey, this is the income gap. 1975, this was the income for a blue-collar worker and the wealthy corporate person. This was their income. But now the gap has increased between income, okay, between the blue-collar worker and the corporate person. The wealth gap, you can look at many statistics. For example, the recent one I read was that the 400 wealthiest Americans have more wealth than the bottom 50% of United States citizens. So 50% of American citizens from the bottom half, there's 400 Americans that have that much wealth between them. So anyways, the wealth gap is increased, and you can use statistics for that. Okay? So again, this is not an introduction. You do not start arguing here. All you do is presenting the event, trend, or phenomenon. That's it. So you're presenting, in this case, the trend, the income and wealth gap. Do not start arguing. Do not start forecasting. Do not give me introduction. Please just follow the directions for this. Okay? Number two, your bolded subtitle will be deregulation. Robert Reich, from his Inequality for All video, it's on HBO. You can also get it through Canopy of our library or YouTube. I put the links there. Robert Reich makes for example, the statistics what you can get from the video for the presentation. But also, Robert Reich make a brief comment about deregulation. But to really substantially develop this argument that deregulation is the key driver, you go to Senator Elizabeth Warren, has a wonderful statement. You can put 2 to 3 paragraphs right here arguing how deregulation actually drives the income and wealth gap, excuse me, but also Warren at the time is looking at the housing market collapse. That was 2008. Excuse me. So the housing market collapse will be a prime example of deregulation. Okay? Do not put housing market collapse as a separate bolded subtitle. Housing market collapse is just a very clear and good example of how deregulation drove the income and wealth gap. It made many people very, they went into bankruptcy, but it also made several people very wealthy. Many people, anecdotally, bought 4, 5, 6 homes, and now they're multimillionaires. Okay? But also Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, he has he actually has a book arguing how deregulation functions. So look for Stiglitz. Okay? So this will be 5, 6, 7 paragraphs all sourced out. You're going to argue deregulation is the driver. And of course, pay attention to the housing market collapse. And you have it's called shadow banking. That's the term, shadow banking, that's connected to this collapse. They were not regulated. Okay? Now, number 3, you're going to look at long-term consequences. The key one to use is undermine democracy. So now you start to see, rather than just give me a cause and effect essay, now you're arguing from the income and wealth gap. You're going to argue that democracy is being undermined, has been undermined, and will continue to be undermined. So again, you can go to Robert Reich Inequality for All video, look at the other videos, other sources I posted. Of course, you go back to Stiglitz right here. He has a whole book on the consequences of the income and wealth gap. Piketty, interesting, Thomas Piketty. He was the first one to identify really the dangers of this income and wealth gap. He looked at IRS returns. But his book, 700 pages, of course, I don't ask you to read it. I bought the book, but I got through maybe 2 pages. So, one of these days I'll kind of play around with it. But the key point from Piketty's penultimate book, Capital, is that United States is in danger from oligarchy. What he's arguing is that you're going to have invisible, an oligarch-like effect when huge families basically become invisible, and that there's no regulation on them, and they'll basically run the nation. So look for that. That can be one paragraph. You can find sources that just argue that. I posted some videos, so you don't have to read the book. But that's Piketty's main claim from that 700 pages of his book, Capital. If any of you going into business, you'll probably be required to buy this book and then go through it. Whether you're Republican, liberal, doesn't matter. This is a key book for all business people to use. Of course, I mentioned Stiglitz, and also there's others. I put other sources in there. Now, coming back to the counter-argument, number 4. Again, you just use the question mark to show that it is a counter-argument. It demarcates. This is a counter-argument. So you've got several to choose from. All you need is one. You've got trickle-down theory. You've got free market. And, of course, wealthier job creators. It's kind of combined to trickle down. But this is how they all work. And you find sources that say that. The trickle-down theory is very popular amongst conservatives. They argue that the wealthy, it's okay to be very wealthy, because what they'll do is they'll hire more people. They'll expand infrastructure. They'll expand their warehouse space. And that this will employ more people, and that wealth will trickle down. Okay? Now, the counter to that, you use Hanauer. Hanauer, he has several TED Talks. He goes around, and his main goal in life now is to argue against the trickle-down theory. A nice, interesting background to Hanauer. He was an entrepreneur in Seattle, and he still is. And he was the first entrepreneur. And guess who came to him? Bezos, Amazon, came to him and said, "Hey, I have this idea. You want to invest?" Hanauer invested. Because of that investment, Hanauer kicked off Amazon, and he, of course, became a multimillionaire, stock options and stuff. So he's not anti-capitalist. That's the whole point. Reich is not anti-capitalist. Hanauer is not anti-capitalist, right? But Hanauer sees the danger. So he's still functioning. He's still an entrepreneur. So maybe you have an idea, you can go pitch it to him. All right, free market. Some people argue, hey, that's the free market. Let the free market do its thing. Don't mess with the free market. That's law of supply and demand. But the problem is, all markets need regulation in order to function. To be fair, for example, you can see in other nations copyright infringement. If there was no regulation, would that be fair to those people who come up with a great idea, a great app? Like my friend Jesse just showed me. No, they need regulation, right? So you need rules and regulation in order for the market to be fair. So it's a myth. There's no such thing as a free market. Some people argue the wealthy are job creators. We kind of covered that. Okay. There's one more. It's called the Horatio Alger myth. Horatio Alger myth. And back during the early 1920s and the Depression time, a very popular fiction piece was called Ragged Dick. That was a guy, he was a shoe shine person named Dick, and he was ragged. But the story is he rose to wealth by what? his capacity, his creativity by merit. Okay? So this was very popular during a time when everybody was suffering during the 1920s and 30s. So they hung on to this Horatio Alger mythology. And of course, but this person, the real people, they don't function in a vacuum. Everyone needs help to rise. So this was a mythology. Okay, so just take one, present it, and then you counter it. The call to action will be substantial. You can say, bring back Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was overturned because they said it overregulated financial markets. And of course, that goes back to the shadow banking and the housing market collapse, because that's exactly what happened. The banks, they bundled less, more risky loans. They bundle. You want to buy this $10 million block? Okay, but it has this other stuff in there. You get high return, but then the problem was it was loaded with these home loans, which were given willy-nilly, and then of course when they collapse, everything else collapsed. So bring back Glass-Steagall. Raise the minimum wage, okay? Or you can say empower unions, okay? Because one possible long-term consequences you can see is that, well, don't worry about it. You can say the middle class, oh, here we go. Middle class disappearing, okay? Okay, so what happens is the middle class has always been a bulwark of markets and regulating wealth. But when you have the middle class shrink, then you have a problem. And the unions were the bulwark or a staunch support of the middle class. So when you see attacks on the unions that happened during Ronald Reagan, when he basically tried to dismantle all unions, you start to see now you have a shrinking middle class. Okay, so you can argue that raise the minimum wage and empower unions. Okay, anti-lobbying efforts. You can argue we need to abolish Citizens United. Citizens United, what happened was Supreme Court ruled that corporations could be judged as individuals. So therefore, they could make unlimited contributions. That was Citizens United. So you can say we got to abolish Citizens United. We need to bring more balance back into who and how much can they donate to political campaigns. Because really what you're arguing here is instead of one vote, now you have $1. Whoops, sorry, $1, okay? So instead of one vote, you have $1, one vote. So you start to see now, instead of one vote, you have the dollar replaces the vote. So that's how democracy is undermined. Okay, so again, 1, present the income and wealth gap. 2, argue for the hidden drivers, in this case, deregulation. 3, you look at undermined democracy, long-term consequence. You don't have to, but you could look at middle class disappearance. You could actually look at racial disparity, because racial disparity will increase inevitably with the income and wealth gap. So now you're going to have minorities, Black, brown, Latinos, indigenous, Native Americans, Polynesians. Their wealth will actually, their wealth gap will increase. So they have more disparity because of the income and wealth gap. Okay? So you could go in other directions, but definitely for sure start with undermine democracy. And if you have time and energy, you can pick something else: middle class disappearance, middle class shrinkage, or racial disparity. Okay? All you need is one counter argument here. I would say take one from Hanauer that Hanauer counters, the trickle-down theory. And then your call to action, there'll be at least 3 paragraphs here. One source paragraph says bring back Glass-Steagall. Might use Warren, might use Stiglitz. Raise the minimum wage, find a source that says that. Maybe Reich. And abolish Citizens United, find a source that says that. Okay, so easy peasy. You can do it. Good luck.